everybody, and welcome to today's Elemental webinar, where we will be discussing ways we can use smart technology to improve resident safety and engagement. Smart technology has the ability to facilitate and enhance the relationship between social landlord and tenant, all the while improving safety, comfort, and affordability. So this session will look at some of the potential applications of smart tech within social housing with some practical examples. We've got a great panel here today featuring Caritas Charles, who's Policy and Insight Manager at not-for-profit tenant engagement experts organisation TPAS. And we've got Colin Foskett, Head of Innovation at Blackwood Homes. So hi both, and welcome.
Hi.
We've got a few talking points to start, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. Audience, you can pop a question in the chat box or in the ask a question box below. We'll try to get to as many as we can, but we will be keeping the session to an hour. So let's start with some introductions and scene setting around today's topic. Colin, can you give us a broad strokes overview of what's meant by smart technology in a residential setting and maybe some examples of this kind of technology?
Yeah, of course. I think a number of things. I think, first of all, connected devices, things like smart speakers, sensors. More and more we see smart thermostats, that sort of thing. From more the safety side, we've got things like, alarm systems and fall detection and all these sorts of things. And alongside that, things like smoke and heat detectors. And more we're seeing kind of smart door entry, everything from, kind of ring doorbell type technology to door entry systems that have facial recognition, so people don't have to struggle with keys and things. So yeah, there's a real kind of breadth of stuff. Also, I think more and more kind of enabling that through Wi-Fi installed into the buildings, and then the devices around that enable that kind of digital connectivity between customers and the organizations.
Great, thank you, Colin. Caritas, is this technology becoming increasingly popular in residential buildings or in particular social housing? And if so, why?
I would answer that probably somewhat. It's becoming more popular, though I did notice something that was quite interesting that I read the other day, that only 40% of asset managers had said that they'd even trialed smart technology systems within their housing stock. So there's obviously a need for greater rollout of that across the board, as it were. Some kind of examples is predominantly in the areas of heating and energy efficiency, I think is kind of the more popular options within housing providers at the moment. I was reading recently about an example that Coastline were doing with housing with remote monitoring of heating and monitoring of systems there for heating and energy use. Why is it becoming more prevalent? I think when it looks at elements such as heating and energy, it's to do with providing systems, particularly in this really exaggerated energy market, that can save costs for customers, but also looking at the structure of buildings as well and look at efficiencies in that respect. So I think with regards to cost, there are some cost implications and how smart technology can work towards reducing costs and maintaining your assets. I also think as well that sadly a lot of smart technology is being introduced due to overstretched staffing. The smarter technology allows a greater workload for some staff, and that can be one of the reasons, not necessarily a good thing. I also think as well, though, that one of the useful things with smarter technology, particularly in social housing, the potential is with regards to working with partner organisations. There are opportunities there for collaborating with regards to data and information with statutory services, particularly when dealing with vulnerable people and using smart technology in that respect. But then again, it also brings up the question of data sensitivity and how that is handled with regards to smart applications. I think also as well, there is a growing need, particularly with things such as the recent Building Safety Bill and the forthcoming Social Housing Regulation Bill, to look at how data is collected in the social housing sector And I think there is going to be a need for a major cultural change to make it much more in real time and much more efficient. So therefore, I think there is a need within the sector to look at things such as asset management, particularly building safety, and how that data is collected, and also things like customer satisfaction data that smart technology can play a really, really crucial role in as well. How is that gathered, and how is that gathered efficiently? So to have a long-winded answer to your question, I would say that yes, it is somewhat, but I think there's a lot more that could be done.
Great, thank you. Okay, Colin, let's talk a little bit about this smart technology in practice then. Which technologies represent some quick wins for landlords and residents? Can you tell us what they are and what kind of outcomes they can deliver?
Yeah, I'll give you some examples of what we've done here at Blackwood, first of all. So I mentioned earlier Wi-Fi. So in all our developments, we've installed development-wide Wi-Fi networks, which then, two benefits that. Number one, if we put in a kind of communal network, it's cheaper for tenants. So, we're talking a cost about £3.50 a month, that sort of thing, compared with the normal broadband costs. It's then a more robust network. So, and we can then also provide other services through it. So, I mentioned earlier about we give our tenants a tablet device. Alongside that, we also have digital skills training. And through things like that, the advantage is, of course, we're all aware if you can use some of the comparison websites and things, you can save money on various bills and things. There are advantages to that. From a landlord perspective, it's easier to communicate with our tenants that way. It's more cost effective, but it also means that the resources we have internally, we can redeploy them in a better way. So those tenants that do need more kind of one-on-one support and can get that, rather than other people that are more than able to do the kind of self-service stuff can do that. So there's big advantages there. Alongside that, in Blackwood, we have a system we call Clever Cogs. Now it's a modular system. Now we work mostly with people with physical disabilities or some sort of independent living need. So it enables us to provide additional services, within our care homes, for example. That might be, rather than the traditional kind of warden call system, everything works through a touch screen. So you can have two-way video, for example, so our staff can triage the situation better. We can have individual buttons and content set up for residents. So someone that maybe couldn't verbalize a particular request can have a button that says, I want to get out of bed now, or I want a comfort break, or whatever that may be. Alongside that, though, we can also have the smart devices, so speakers, smart voice assistants, that will enable people to, say, control blinds or doors or windows or whatever. But also the more fun stuff, the music and all the things, and creating that content for people on their devices might be part of what we do in terms of the digital skills coaches that we have. The other part of that as well is just in terms of those sensors within the home that not only keep the individual safe, so that might be things like fall detection, it might be things linked to fridges that we know whether a particular appliance has been used or whatever. So again, there can be early indications of a potential problem. But also alongside that, we've got, I mentioned the two-way video stuff. So going back to that kind of, loneliness and isolation piece as well, or being able to get access to information about particular medical conditions. So here in Scotland, we have a thing called NHS Inform. So, all of our devices have links to that, and people can create their own content around a particular medical condition. So, if they've got, say, diabetes or whatever, they can set up content around that. I think more widely, some of the things I mentioned earlier, things like smart door entry systems. So, again, going back to our kind of specialism with physical disability, not having to worry about finding, a key or whatever can be really useful in that context, and linking that again with automatic door openers or whatever. And the other part of that, going back to one of the points that Caritas made earlier around that data. One of the things that we've done, we're running a large project at the moment called Peoplehood, which is a healthy aging project. And one of the things as part of that we're doing is around personal data stores. And although not directly related to the technology, what it does is it gives individuals control over their data. So they see what data we have, what it's being used for, but also they can share that data. So, for example, if it's to do with a certain medical condition, say it's to do with their medication prompts, for example, on our care system, they can share that with their GP and say, well, I've been taking my medication, here's the evidence, but it's just not having the same impact. So there's lots of things around that kind of deployment of technology. I think the final one is, energy costs are all of us are concerned about that, and the kind of smart energy devices that we have, linking that as well through Internet of Things to say door and window sensors that mean that the heating doesn't stay on if you've got a window open or things like that. So that kind of clever stuff we can do around technology. I think that's probably enough for now.
Thank you, Colin. Okay, so Caritas, what are some of the challenges involved in physically deploying this technology into a building, or more specifically into a social housing setting?
Rachel, I think to ask that, I'd probably like to ask Colin a question on that, actually. You mentioned with regards to smart technology, and within the area you work in, you give people tablets to operate from. One of the barriers that I would see is how people, learn them. I understand that you give people support with that, but I have a computer in front of me and I still have to call an IT person on something at one point. So does that support happen to be ongoing? And also as well, what if you have a disability issue that means things like tablets could be quite awkward for you, like a arthritis, for example, which would make that difficult? How do you practically overcome that?
Yeah, I think great question. There's a number of things. I think first and foremost, going back to our principles of everything's about choice and control. So I'm talking about us delivering services via digital means, but equally we have physical. We still have, housing officers going out, our care staff going out, etc., physically there. So if people aren't able to use the technology in the same way, that there is that face-to-face contact as well. Our experience in delivering the technology is, the main barrier for a lot of people is cost. There is so much smart stuff out there now in terms of things like eye gaze technology, or even built into so many devices now, different sizes of buttons, different way you tap the screen, etc. And because we have our own internal digital skills team, they're able to work with our customers, and a lot of our customers we also provide care to, so it's slightly different set up there in terms of us being able to put assistive technology in place for people. I think the key, going back to the kind of learning part of that as well, is taking it at the pace that the individual wants, and it's also linking it to what does someone want the system to do for them. So for a lot of our customers and tenants, it's about being able to see, right, who's coming to do my care visit today. Can I contact my family and friends via, so can I do a video call? They're fairly easy things for us to set up for people. And the way our, going back to, I said, we've got a kind of bespoke system we call Clever Cogs. So it works through a series of tiles on the screen that are set up with that individual. So, for example, there could be a picture of their sister on the screen or whatever if they want to video call them. So it's an easy system to use. But equally, we've other people that have got great digital skills that will just use their own tablet and access our services, you know, in a different way. So, but yeah, going back to, it's about just what is it the person wants to achieve by using the system, and how do we make that happen? And I think more and more, as I mentioned, the technology is moving on to a pace that even if someone can't physically touch the screen, you know, voice assistant technology has got so much better as well. So some of that can be done that way as well.
I have to say I'm a bit skeptical as a practical user on how fast that is actually going. And what I would say as well, as another note I made with regards to the problems, is where I live in North Somerset, we have a lot of rural housing, and the internet connectivity is absolutely appalling in North Somerset. I don't know from the stock where you are, Colin, whether you have those similar issues. And all of this relies on a sufficient infrastructure. So to kind of answer Rachel's questions on the challenges of physically developing technology into buildings, if there isn't the relevant IT infrastructure surrounding the assets, it's difficult to then implement them. And I know there are villages and towns in North Somerset where that would be exceptionally difficult. I don't know if you've encountered the same.
Yeah, I mean, we work all over mainland Scotland, so there are some areas where connectivity is more of an issue. Going back to the fact, though, that generally the infrastructure is there. It's getting back to the affordability. So by being able to put in broadband supplies into our developments and then sharing that amongst our tenants, that's made that piece easier. Plus, it's a managed connection. So we have, from our digital team here, they're able to see if there are problems occurring with that network, and then instruct, you know, because we can then instruct it to be repaired much quicker. You know, we're almost able to preempt the fact there's an issue with some of that. But yeah, absolutely get your point. When we started on this journey about 5 or 6 years ago, there were areas where there wasn't sufficient broadband, and we've had to invest. You know, another side of that is in Scotland, we've had quite a big investment into that infrastructure piece in terms of fibre to the premises now. So, you know, it's becoming less and less of an issue. Alongside that, though, we also have quite a big investment in 4G and 5G. So there's been a big investment recently in those kind of not spots, as they call them. So it is becoming better, but you're absolutely right. There are some areas still where, you know, the technology just isn't there yet.
Yeah, and I mean, to sort of the final point I'd say on that as well, Rachel, is that I wouldn't really say it'd be necessary in Colin's case, but with some social housing, what would concern me as an issue is the transitory nature of some people's residences, and how there could be quite a quick turnaround of people residing in those properties, and how to maintain the standard of the smart technology within those buildings, I think could potentially be quite difficult.
Okay, it's interesting. So as you guys were having this discussion, I was reflecting on potential risks. So obviously, Caritas, you've mentioned, you know, the issues of not spots and the technology sort of relying heavily on the internet, basically, and connectivity. Colin, you mentioned, for example, one kind of technology is automatic door openings, for example. So are there any risks associated with this technology failing for vulnerable people, where a failure on the tech's behalf might actually put them at risk?
Again, I mean, going back to door entry in general, you know, I think all of them have certain risks. You know, the fact that it's got facial recognition doesn't stop the fact that, you know, it might, you know, the door might not open in the same way as if you use a key fob or whatever else. What I would say is that, you know, generally with a lot of the buildings that we have, you know, the community there will support one another. So if a particular tenant's having issues with getting into the building, two things. Number one, they can phone us and we can get someone to assist them to get in. But, you know, it's no different, I think, from any other technology about, you know, if you lose your key, if, you know, and more what we can do is build into that system some sort of redundancy that, for example, we've got backup of power supplies, we've got failover to, say, 4G, so mobile connectivity for certain key services. So it's unlikely that these things are going to break. And certainly our experience is that, you get teething problems in the early days. We make sure we've got staff available on site in those, when we deploy new technology, so that if there are major issues like that, we're making sure that we fix them there and then. And we've changed some of the technology over time because things weren't as good as we wanted them to be. And, particularly around that connectivity piece, that we didn't get that right at the beginning, and we worked really, really hard with a number of manufacturers and installers to make sure that we get that right. But it comes back down to, have you got then the kind of backup to make sure that tenants, customers, particularly those vulnerable people, aren't then left stranded or whatever. But I would go back to one of the things when we started on this journey, we had a lot of analog telecare equipment, and frankly you didn't know if that telecare equipment was working until you did the weekly test call to those devices, because there was no two-way communication on those. So realistically, if that equipment had gone wrong 5 seconds after you'd done your weekly test call, you potentially wouldn't know about it until a week later. The digital technology alerts us immediately it loses connectivity, and a staff member then has to intervene and see, right, what is the issue? Can I deal with that? So in some ways, it's although the technology, you could argue, has its downfalls, at least we're aware it's not connected. Or the same with the door entry system, if it loses connectivity, we know about it, so you can then put something in place.
Can I ask, is there additional security measures that could be an advantage for that? So, for example, the door entry system, if you have a pair of keys and your keys are stolen, you might have to replace the locks. Is it possible to remotely then freeze that key, electronic key as it were, to prevent entry? Oh, good.
Yeah. Absolutely. And not only that, you can give temporary keys as well to people. So we use an app for that. But you can kind of, so for example, if the other advantage of this is if you've got some maintenance people going in to do particular bits of work, you can give them a temporary key. It will only give them access to a particular area of the building, for example, or to a particular, say we've got an empty home within a development that they're going in to do some work on before a new tenant moves in. They can get entry to the communal thing, but then only entry into that one tenancy as well. Plus, it's all time stamped, so we know when people are there and what they're doing. So, in many ways, it gives you lots of advantages. And going back to, if someone does lock themselves out, that two-way video that I was talking about on the door entry, they can video back to our staff. We can verify, that's the tenant. We can let them in. We can open potentially with some of our tenancies as well. We can open their main door as well. So, at least they're not waiting somewhere for a locksmith to come out, or a housing officer or whatever with a spare set of keys. So it can be quicker.
Okay, so we've touched on the element of skills and learning for the residents using these technologies, but let's actually just talk about their attitudes towards them. Caritas, do you feel that residents are generally receptive to smart technologies, or does it sort of very much depend on the demographic?
I think it really does depend on the demographic, and it would vary immensely. I think one of the things that I get, particularly from when I'm working with older residents, though I'm not making any broad assumptions, is that the idea of doing anything electronically, whether it's to email something, leave a message, or use an app, doesn't give you the tangible results that you would get from speaking to a real human being. They feel that they're not getting proper answers. And what I would also say as well from my conversations is people feel that they aren't getting the feedback either. So what I haven't seen necessarily in smart technology that I've seen is something that gives the feedback and actually allows the resident to see the process and how it's being dealt with. So, a bit like the apps we get for tracking a parcel, or something like that, so that people know that their request or the action that they've asked for is being undertaken, and if not, it's explained to them why it isn't. And I think that's why people have that kind of reticence and how they want to be able to talk physically to a person to get that kind of response. There's also what Colin mentioned about cost as well, I think is an answer. And then understanding the tangible benefits of what it is as well, because it feels that I think a lot of technology at the moment feels like it's done onto residents, that it's not necessarily something that they are a two-way participant in. And I think sometimes we fall victim of saying this would be really useful without looking at what Colin was mentioning before we went live on co-design. And, you know, is this useful to the organisation? Yes, possibly, but is this useful to the tenant as well? And if so, why? And what functionality can we put in it that's useful to the tenant? If it's only useful for one party, I don't think it's going to be effective. It has to have that benefit for both. And I also think as well, one of the kind of major barriers, I think, particularly with regards to sharing information, is there's an awful lot of people that have that kind of techno fear, and sometimes rightly so. You know, you see a lot of high profile cases in the press of information leaking, being hacked, made available. So people are quite reticent in actually giving information out, particularly that could be of a sensitive nature, to yet another system, yet another body. And I would also say as well that, you know, one of the concerns is the anecdotal, that they can't have that if they feel that if the faster it goes on down this smart tech road, the chances for them to give that anecdotal evidence to a housing provider gets lost. So one of the things that I quite noticed that came out of the Grenfell report was a lot of the information about the structural problems at Grenfell Tower were given to frontline staff anecdotally. Now, unfortunately, it wasn't fed up the chain of command so that anything could be done about it. But one of the things with smart technology that would concern me is how you can trap the anecdotal, how you can track that and use that anecdotal evidence, which might be lost reporting it in an app compared to when you're talking to a staff member. So I think some of those concerns are what I've heard in kind of conversations with residents.
Sure. I mean, you mentioned then that perhaps one of the barriers is the concern that this is another thing that's taking my data. What risks are there around privacy? Because the amount of data that's being consumed by these technologies, as you discussed earlier, Colin, you know, things like who's entering, who's leaving, how's heating being used, what's being taken from this, and so on and so forth. So it's a large volume of data there. So what are the risks associated with that?
Sorry, is that to me?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry. I think a number of things. I think, yes, there is a lot of data coming across in terms of, but I go back to what are we using that data for? And it's having that conversation, going back to, I was saying earlier about choice and control for customers. So people can choose to use the facial recognition, or choose to use the smart key, or choose to use a normal key. And depending on their choices in that depends on what data is into the system. We're very careful when we pick our technology and finding out where does the data go. And to the point where we reject some technologies because, you know, is the data, for example, sitting on a server somewhere in China and we have no control over it whatsoever. So it's making sure that, you know, we've gone through the proper checks with a bit of technology. We know how the data is being handled, and, you know, we have control over that data where we need to, but equally the tenant, the customer, has ultimate control over that data. And again, it's having those conversations. I did mention earlier before we came about co-design and co-creation. So at Blackwood, we do a lot of that, you know, in terms of how we've developed our systems over the years, comes from a point of, right, going back to, you know, what you want it to do, what are the issues you're experiencing, how can we use, you know, both that blend of people and technology to help with that. So, it is making sure that when people are, say, signing up to the door, I'll use that door entry system as an example because it is facial recognition. They're fully aware of what that means, and that everyone knows how that data is handled and why. And I think as long as you're transparent with people about what it is, people can then make that informed choice. They have control, and as long as we have that within the system, I think that's really important. I also think, going back to just the point Caritas made about data and the use of that data as well in terms of that accountability part. For us within, for example, and for customers to get feedback on where that particular inquiry or service is at, I totally agree. I think that's so important in terms of that transparency on if you are filling out a repair request, for example, online, you are able to see, right, that was received by someone at this time, it's been sent to the contractor, they're just waiting on the contractor calling me back to confirm when that's going to happen, and that will happen within this time frame. So it's making sure that there is that, because all of us use the example of, we can all track our parcel down to it's with this courier and it's coming here and it's going to be with me between. It should be exactly the same with a lot of our other services. So, for example, for our care services, we have a very similar thing that our care customers can click on their care at home visit, see who's delivering that care that day. There's a picture of the carer, so they know when that carer turns up at the door. Yep, that's my carer. Within a certain time frame, they can see that where the person is as well, so they know that they may be on the same street. But again, it's controlled and people are aware of what data is shared, because the other part of that is not just the data concern for our customers, it's also the data concern from our staff members delivering that as well, and what are they being tracked for. So lots of consultation about how we use that. And the other part of that is that kind of lone working side of it as well, in terms of knowing where our staff are.
Great, thank you, Colin. Okay, well, going back to what we were discussing previously, which was looking at residents' attitudes on this. In your experience, Colin, do you actually find that some particular technologies are more popular with residents than others, and indeed facility employees?
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to it, there are different. So we work with people with quite severe disabilities as well as people that have no disability at all. So depending on what that technology is going to provide someone in terms of that independent living piece, some technology is, as you'd imagine, much more popular. So going back to things like automated door entry or the ability for someone to control devices in their home via just touching a button on a screen, or via voice activation or whatever, or eye gaze technology or whatever. So you can imagine that there's kind of two extremes in terms of that kind of adoption and take up of the technology. From the kind of facility management type stuff, the systems that give us kind of early indication of problems are really, really popular. So if we know a gas boiler's having a problem in advance of it being a breakdown, then that's really good in terms of that. Both customers and, although quite often, obviously from that side, a customer might not know that there's an issue yet. But they're sort of the things that talking to our asset staff, we want to explore. We're not doing much of that at the moment in terms of that early indication stuff. The other side of that, though, going back to the energy stuff, is another one that I think, we can get information about how heating's being used, and certainly some kind of conversations we've been having recently around then offering potential energy advice around that. So if you find that someone is heating, say, every single room of their home through the data that comes from smart thermostats, and there are other ways of doing that, if you're not using the bedroom during the daytime, then just heating it later in the day or whatever. So it again goes back to how we might use the data And it comes back to, I think, two things for our customers. Does it save me money? Does it save me time? Or does it enable me to do things that I couldn't do before? They're the kind of three key drivers, I think, for that.
I think what I would add on to that, though, Rachel, for me personally, and for some other residents that I've spoken to, living in that environment, I would find that a little bit scary, because it seems a little bit big brothery. It seems like, oh, I've noticed you've left that heating on in your room for such and such a time. And I think it has to be sensitivity to people's own personal independence as well, and their own sense of their own responsibility as well. If people request that, or if for nature of a disability they request that, then all being well. But in general social housing stock, I think you would find a lot of bite back and resistance to things that are as intrusive as that, if it was remotely monitored.
Well, I suppose this comes down to the conversation we were having earlier about, does it work for the building manager or the residents? And it has to work for both.
If I can just come in on that point, because I totally agree. It has to be about, all along I've said it's about choice and control. So with those kind of prompts as well about energy use, it has to go to the customer who said that, yeah, that'd be useful for me. And otherwise it's, you're absolutely right. That otherwise it does really get into Big Brother is watching you. So yeah, I definitely not something we should be doing just off the cuff, as it were. Yeah.
Okay, so let's have a look at the future of this sort of residential smart technology then. Excuse me. So, Colin, obviously Blackwood does a lot with innovation in this space. Can you foresee any new trends or interesting technologies on the horizon, things that might be emerging at this juncture?
Yeah, I'll talk about a few things that we're doing at the moment. So, artificial intelligence, machine learning, that sort of stuff is one of the areas that more and more is coming to fruition. So we have a project at the moment using smart meter data. So again, it's designed to look at energy usage, but from energy usage we can detect patterns of daily living. Now this one is all about people that are concerned about falls, or maybe just on the cusp of thinking, I maybe need care, but actually it's not that bad yet, but I'd like a little bit of reassurance here that if something does happen, I'm going to get an alert, or my neighbor or my family member is going to get an alert. So from energy usage data, we can detect things like kettles being used. It tends to be things like larger appliances. We can show, for example, that a shower's been on for a period of time. So from that, an individual can then create some alerts that are unique to them. So for example, someone might say, if I don't put the kettle on by 10 o'clock in the morning, can you flag an alert? Now, the way that system has been set up from the co-design that we've done is it first of all alerts to that individual and says, you're not made a cup of tea this morning, everything okay? And they can cancel it and say, well, actually, I'm having a lie in, or whatever, or I'm not in, whatever. But equally, it can then be used for things like, we know from experience that lots of people will take their fall detector watch off when they go in the shower, even though it's waterproof and everything else. So if they fall in the shower, they've no way of potentially getting assistance until the next visit happens, care visit or whatever. But with this technology, we can look at things like the average person showers for something like 11 minutes or something. If the shower's still on 25 minutes later, could we flag an alert, say, actually, we think something might be wrong? Again, it would go to the individual first. Now, obviously, they wouldn't answer that. So then it would escalate to a family member or whatever. So there's those areas which I think are quite exciting. Again, though, going back to how that data is used, that it is going back to choice for that individual, and it isn't just something that is put in willy-nilly. Other areas for us, more and more, robotics is becoming something that we're exploring. and really around physical disability, but also some of the stuff around assistance robotics for staff. So, we know, for example, amongst care staff, moving and handling of people can cause a lot of issues in terms of, particularly as carers get older, there is a real, a set of information around people just, coming out of care because they can no longer do that physical part of the work. So, are there ways we can use robots to help turn people or get people out of bed or whatever? And again, from the co-design work we've done on that already, there are very much two camps around that. One around people that, oh no, absolutely not, wouldn't want a robot, thought of that, just isn't for me. But other people that are like, oh, absolutely, I'd rather not have another person in the room helping me go to the bathroom or helping me go to the shower. So, it very much goes back to that choice and control thing. And I think the third one for me is around, I mentioned briefly about personal data stores and kind of that control of data and having visibility on data. I think for me, that kind of is a key driver in terms of, loads of us have got things like Amazon Alexa or Google Home and all these sorts of voice assistants. We don't truly know where the data goes. We just, we maybe have a look at the terms and conditions as we sign up to it. But, having a data store that shows us how our data is being used, but also then enables us to share that data. So for example, if someone gets a diagnosis of a particular condition and then is able to share that data with, say, their housing provider because they want an adaptation or, whatever that might be. I think they're areas that are particularly exciting. And sorry, one last one, and that is around the kind of smart thermostat, smart power stuff. So again, looking at, more and more, there are smart tariffs out there around if you can shift your energy use to particular times, you can save money. So, how can we use that technology to the advantage of our tenants, and linking that with things like battery storage, solar panels and other technology out there that can bring energy costs down? Because I think we're all, that's really at the forefront at the moment.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you, Colin. So Caritas, I'm mindful that we've only got about 15 minutes left, but I'm interested on your thoughts. In a social housing context, do you think this kind of technology is going to become more prolific? And if so, what challenges and opportunities does that open up?
I think it's inevitable that it'll become prolific. And I think some of the challenges are keeping pace with change. The social housing sector isn't exactly the best funded sector in the country. And one of my concerns is that, the sooner you install systems, they become redundant. So how you actually keep pace with change and technology, I think, will be a major challenge. I'm also, will go back to what I said about the issues of consent and the issues of how that information is used will become a real challenge, but also an opportunity as well, because, as Colin mentioned, for example, with issues around medical issues or issues around obtaining benefits or anything of that, I can see huge potentials for smart data in that respect. And also for safety as well. And as I mentioned at the start, we're entering a new regulatory regime now in England with regards to social housing and the collecting of data. And I could see smart technology helping with regards to things like customer satisfaction, monitoring repairs, and allowing providers to be a lot more accurate in analysing how their customers feel about the services they receive. So I could see real benefits there, but there are also significant challenges.
Okay, great. Thank you both. So we've got one question in the chat. Oh no, there's two now. Audience, if you'd like to pop one in, please go ahead. So yes, great question here. What about the costs for some of this technology? How do you work out ROI?
That's not one for me. Colin.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier that we're quite a specialist housing and care provider. So for us, some of the technology is very easy to look at the return on investment because it's all about, that enabling piece. So for example, if someone previously had to have someone coming in to help them, open blinds, turn things on or off or whatever else, whereas someone can live more independently in their own home by this technology. So, we very much take the view of, with our Blackwood house and the technology we've put into it, we've lots of people that are moving from, say, institutional care to living independently. Now, we know that the costs associated with, institutional care are much higher than independent living. So there's a clear return on investment in those pieces. In terms of the kind of Wi-Fi infrastructure and stuff that we put in, again, clear benefit, because ultimately what happens there is customers are paying a reduced cost for their broadband supply. So there's a benefit to the customer. There's also a benefit to us as a care provider and a housing association, in that we've got connectivity within those developments for our staff as well. And we all know that mobile data is more expensive than Wi-Fi and what have you. So again, in terms of the kind of wider benefits on the technology, we do that very much on a case-by-case basis. So the energy monitoring sort of stuff that we're really at the early stages of, we will do a number of test projects on that. We work quite a lot with universities, so we get expertise in around making sure that the technology that we are specifying does give us that return on investment. And I think it is that evaluation, the testing of it, and frankly not believing the technology company salesman that comes in and tells you the stuff, because we all know they're going to tell you it'll do all these wonderful things until you actually install it and realize it costs 3 times as much and delivers half what they said it was going to do. So yeah, been there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Colin. Another question here. Is there an issue with skills in the sense of installation and or maintenance of smart tech? So the question asker has specifically pointed to you, Colin. Have you had to put your team through a lot of training for this? But also interested to hear what Caritas has to say about this and how it's been deployed in a residential setting.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things for us has been about looking at our people plan internally and looking at skills gaps and, how roles might change in the future. I mean, in our, we run a thing called our 24/7 responder service, which, is our, the two-way video responder service that I was talking about. And recently we've been looking at telepresence robotics as part of that service. And if you'd have, our staff have clearly had to have some training around how you deploy a robot, how you map it into a building, how you, interact with that, the software associated with that. That's kind of an extreme, and it's a test project, but gave a particular benefit to a customer. But I think that digital skills piece, in terms of we very much had to start a program of digital skills training for all of our staff. So having that internal training resource is really important. But what we've been able to do as well is, join other groups and forums where we've been able to share information and skills. In Scotland, we have a number of technology-enabled care forums, and there's other organisations like Telecare Services Association and stuff where you can get training and information, and forums where people can share expertise. But yeah, I think definitely there is a skills gap there. I think people are going to need to learn about installation. I think we've raised a number of times today about data. I think that both the ethics of that data, the ethics of AI, how that data is controlled, all of that I think is important, and the areas where we definitely didn't have those skill sets. But again, going back to bringing in expertise where you need it, we've used lots of academic support with that sort of thing, because again, it's the unbiased support that you get and insight that you get, and we're involved in a number of programs with universities where they're looking at the future skills for the industry. So that also helps in terms of, you know, making sure that housing care qualifications that are coming down the line are ready for these things. So it's looking at it in the round, I think.
Great, thank you, Colin. Caritas, is there anything you'd like to add there?
Well, I think he said it all, but what I would add on to that, though, is I think it's quite important, and anybody listening, I'd say, with training, is to have that skills support for tenants as well, and having that ongoing skills support. And I know when new platforms have been introduced for service use in other providers, they've created digital champions who are tenants that work within communities. And I think initiatives like that are really, really vital as well. And I would say that also on top of that skills training, there has to be effective communication. So as like Colin said, with regards to the responsibility of data handling and how that's undertaken, there has to be a transparency and a clarity so that tenants are aware of where their data's going, how it's being stored and how it's used. So I think skills in that communication set, as well as the technology skills, are vital.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you both. Well, we don't have any more questions and we are nearly out of time for today. So thanks to the audience for joining us, and especially to our speakers, Colin and Caritas, for their great insight into this area. This webinar will be available to view shortly on the Elemental website. And if you're not already, please do follow us on LinkedIn. We are Elemental UK for all of our latest updates. Thank you very much.